The last person Damon Blackwood expected to see was the woman he had already buried in his memories. The massive doors of the Iron Summit Hall swung inward with a slow groan, drawing every eye in the room. Conversations died instantly. Even the crackling fire in the stone hearth seemed quieter somehow. Alpha King Damon Blackwood stood at the center of the long council table, one hand resting against the polished oak surface. Representatives from 12 packs had gathered for the first peace summit in nearly a decade. The air smelled of cedar smoke, old leather, and the cold promise of approaching winter. Outside, gray clouds stretched across the mountains for miles. Inside, tension sat heavy on every shoulder. Damon had negotiated treaties, settled disputes, and faced powerful leaders from every corner of the Northern Territories. None of them had ever made his pulse hesitate. Until now, a royal attendant stepped forward. Leader Evelyn Carter of Silver Ridge. The announcement echoed through the chamber. Damon barely registered the name at first. Then the room changed. Every member of the Silver Ridge delegation rose to their feet. Not out of courtesy, out of respect. Genuine respect. The kind that couldn't be demanded. The kind that had to be earned. Damon frowned slightly. Silver Ridge had always been influential, but not enough to command this level of attention. Then she entered. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single figure crossing the doorway. Her dark navy coat moved softly around her as she walked. The silver crest of Silver Ridge rested over her heart. Her posture was calm, controlled, confident. Nothing about her suggested uncertainty. Nothing about her resembled the frightened Omega he remembered. Damon felt the breath leave his lungs. Evelyn. The name struck him harder than any accusation ever could. 7 years vanished in an instant. Rain. A broken goodbye. Words he could never take back. The memory flashed through his mind before disappearing again. Yet she was standing there. Alive. Strong. Looking nothing like the woman he had last seen. Around the table, several leaders nodded respectfully as she approached. Others offered small smiles. One elderly alpha even stepped aside so she could take the position at the head of the Silver Ridge delegation. Damon noticed every detail. The confidence in her stride. The quiet authority in her expression. The way people instinctively listened when she moved. This wasn't an advisor. This wasn't a representative. This was a leader. Evelyn finally looked up. Their eyes met across nearly 30 feet of polished stone floor. The noise in the room faded completely. No anger appeared on her face. No sadness. No bitterness. Somehow that unsettled him more. She simply looked at him as if he were a chapter she had already finished reading years ago. Damon's chest tightened unexpectedly. Evelyn, he heard himself say. Her expression remained composed. Alpha King Blackwood. Formal. Distant. Professional. The words landed like ice. She took her seat without another glance. Around them, conversations slowly resumed. Papers shifted. Chairs moved. Advisors whispered. Yet Damon barely heard any of it. Because one impossible thought refused to leave his mind. 7 years ago, he had walked away believing Evelyn Carter would disappear from his life forever. Now she sat across from him as the leader of the only pack powerful enough to challenge his own. And somehow, he had this sinking feeling that seeing her again was only the beginning of everything he was about to lose. You are standing in the wrong place, Evelyn. The words still echoed in her memory 7 years later. Back then, the Moonfall Gathering Hall had been filled with music, laughter, and hopeful faces. Every unmated wolf in the territory had arrived wearing their best clothes, carrying dreams they barely dared to speak aloud. Evelyn had been one of them. She remembered smoothing the wrinkles from her pale blue dress while her heart raced beneath her ribs. At 22, she still believed the future could be kind. The scent of fresh pine drifted through the open windows. Lanterns glowed overhead. Beyond the hall, the full moon hung low over the mountains. Everything had seemed beautiful until Damon Blackwood walked away. Even now, the memory felt sharp. Not because he had raised his voice. He had not. Not because he had embarrassed her publicly. He had not done that either. Somehow the quietness of it hurt more. Damon had simply looked at her with distant eyes and made a choice. One that left no room for her. One that left no room for them. The celebration continued around her as if nothing important had happened. Wolves danced. Glasses clinked together. Laughter drifted through the air. Yet Evelyn stood completely still near the edge of the room. Invisible. Forgotten. She could remember staring at the wooden floorboards because looking at anyone else felt impossible. Every smile she saw seemed brighter than her own future. Every happy voice felt farther away. A woman brushed past her shoulder without stopping. Two young wolves whispered nearby. Neither bothered lowering their voices. I heard Damon is meeting someone from the Western Territories. That makes more sense. Evelyn swallowed hard. The words were not cruel. They did not need to be. The truth already hurt enough. Outside, cold air greeted her as she stepped onto the stone terrace. The sounds of the celebration became muffled behind closed doors. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared across the valley below. Hundreds of lights twinkled in the distance. Families gathered inside warm homes. Friends shared meals. Life moved forward. Her own life suddenly felt stuck. A soft breeze lifted strands of her blonde hair. Tears threatened to rise, but she blinked them away. No, not here. Not where anyone could see. She had always believed strength meant enduring pain quietly. Standing there beneath the moon, she tried her best. Footsteps approached behind her. For one impossible second, hope returned. Her pulse jumped. Maybe Damon had changed his mind. Maybe he had come to explain. Maybe there was still something worth saving. She turned. The hope vanished instantly. It was not Damon. Only a servant carrying empty trays back inside. The woman offered a polite smile before continuing on her way. Evelyn stood alone again. The realization settled slowly. Heavy. Final. Whatever future she had imagined with Damon Blackwood no longer existed. She drew a shaky breath and placed a hand against her stomach. Without thinking, a strange warmth lingered there. Small. Faint. Easy to ignore. Evelyn frowned slightly. Then she looked back toward the brightly lit hall one last time. She did not know it yet, but before another month had passed, a secret would change the course of her entire life. The first sign appeared on a cold October morning. Evelyn had been awake since sunrise, helping organize inventory at her family's small trading store. Normally, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the back room made her smile. That morning, it turned her stomach. She barely reached the sink before a wave of nausea passed through her. For several seconds, she gripped the edge of the counter, breathing slowly. When the feeling finally faded, unease settled in its place. She told herself it was stress. Nothing more. The past few weeks had been difficult. Anyone would feel exhausted. Yet deep down, a quiet voice whispered that something had changed. 3 days later, she found herself sitting inside a small clinic nearly 20 miles from home. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The waiting room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. An elderly healer named Margaret reviewed several notes before lifting her eyes toward Evelyn. Her expression softened immediately. That frightened Evelyn more than any bad news could have. Silence stretched between them. Outside, thunder rolled across distant hills. "Miss Carter," Margaret said gently, "you are going to have a child." The words seemed to freeze the entire room. Evelyn stared at her. She heard every syllable. She understood them perfectly, yet her mind refused to accept them. A child. Her child. For several moments, she simply sat there. The world felt strangely distant. The rain. The clock ticking on the wall. The faint hum of the overhead lights. Everything sounded far away. Her hand slowly moved to her stomach. Suddenly, that strange warmth she had felt weeks earlier made sense. 1,000 emotions crashed together. Fear. Confusion. Wonder. Grief. Hope. None of them won. They simply existed side by side. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Margaret offered a small smile. "Very sure." The drive home felt endless. Gray skies stretched across the horizon. Wind pushed fallen leaves across the highway. Evelyn barely noticed any of it. Her thoughts circled endlessly around one impossible truth. She was carrying a future she had never planned for. More importantly, she was carrying it alone. By the time she reached town, dusk had settled over the valley. Lights glowed warmly from houses scattered along the streets. Families gathered for dinner. Children laughed from front porches. The simple scenes made her chest ache. She parked her truck near the overlook above town and remained there long after darkness arrived. Below, hundreds of tiny lights sparkled against the mountainside. Above, stars slowly emerged through breaks in the clouds. Evelyn wrapped her coat tighter around herself. Tears finally escaped despite her efforts to stop them. Not because she regretted the child. Never that. She cried because the life she imagined had disappeared. Nothing ahead looked familiar anymore. Eventually, the tears stopped. The cold air dried her cheeks. A quiet determination replaced the fear little by little. She placed both hands against her stomach and looked toward the horizon. I do not know how, she whispered into the night, but I will figure it out. The wind carried her words into the darkness. Somewhere beyond those mountains, a future waited. Evelyn could not see it yet. She could not know that within months she would leave everything behind. She only knew one thing for certain. From this moment forward, she was no longer fighting for herself alone. Winter arrived earlier than expected that year. Frost coated the rooftops each morning. The mountains surrounding Moonfall looked like they had been carved from ice. Evelyn watched the first snowfall from her bedroom window, one hand resting lightly against her growing stomach. Nearly 4 months had passed since the clinic visit. Every day made her future feel more real. Every day made her current life feel less sustainable. Rumors traveled quickly through packed territories. Questions followed even faster. At first, people simply noticed that she seemed quieter. Then they noticed she stopped attending social gatherings. By Thanksgiving, whispers had begun following her through town. Nobody confronted her directly. They did not have to. The lingering stares said enough. Evelyn tried to ignore them. She focused on work. She focused on preparing for the baby. She focused on surviving one day at a time. Yet pressure continued building around her like storm clouds gathering before heavy rain. One evening, her father knocked gently on her bedroom door. The sound alone made her stomach tighten. He rarely knocked. Usually he walked straight in. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. Evelyn nodded. Her father entered carrying 2 mugs of hot tea. Steam curled upward between them as he sat beside her. For several moments neither spoke. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches of the oak tree near the house. Finally, he exhaled heavily. "People are talking." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I know." Silence returned. Not angry silence. Sad silence. The kind that hurt more. Her father stared into his mug. "You do not owe me explanations." His voice sounded tired. "But I need to know if you are all right." The simple question nearly broke her. Nobody had asked that in months. Tears burned behind her eyes. She swallowed them down. "I will be." Her father studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You always were stronger than people realized." Those words stayed with her long after he left the room. Stronger than people realized. Maybe. Or maybe she had simply become good at hiding fear. December brought harsher challenges. Business at the store slowed. Neighbors became distant. Invitations stopped arriving. Some friends remained supportive, but even they seemed uncertain what to say. Evelyn could feel her world shrinking week by week. One snowy afternoon, she found herself standing at the overlook above town again. The same place where she had first promised to keep moving forward. The valley below looked peaceful beneath a blanket of white. Smoke rose from chimneys. Christmas lights glowed in windows. Families prepared for the holidays. She should have felt at home there. Instead, she felt like a visitor watching someone else's life. A folded letter rested in her coat pocket. It had arrived that morning. From a distant territory called Silver Ridge. A small pack nearly 600 miles north. The community was searching for skilled workers willing to relocate. Most people would have tossed the letter aside. Evelyn read it 3 times. The wind brushed across her face. Snowflakes drifted through the air. Slowly, she pulled the letter from her pocket again. Her eyes lingered on a single sentence near the bottom. New beginnings are possible for those willing to seek them. For the first time in months, something stirred inside her. Not certainty, not confidence, just possibility. Evelyn looked down at her stomach and smiled faintly. Then she made a decision that would change everything. Before spring arrived, she would leave Moonfall behind. The morning Evelyn left Moonfall, the sky was painted in pale shades of silver and blue. Snow still covered the fields surrounding town. Her truck carried everything she owned. 2 suitcases, a few boxes, several family photographs. Nothing that looked impressive. Yet every mile she placed behind her felt heavier than the last. Her father had hugged her before sunrise. Neither of them had said much. Some goodbyes lived beyond words. By noon, the familiar mountains had disappeared in her rearview mirror. The road stretched endlessly ahead. For the first time in months, nobody knew her story. Nobody whispered when she entered a room. Nobody looked at her with pity. The feeling was strange, almost frightening. Nearly 600 miles later, Silver Ridge finally appeared. The territory sat deep within a valley surrounded by towering pine forests. Snow clung to the peaks above like white crowns. Wooden buildings lined the main road. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Children played near the town square despite the cold. The community looked smaller than she expected. Simpler too. Yet something about it felt warm. Real. Evelyn parked near the administrative office and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The scent of cedar filled her lungs. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance. For a brief moment, she simply stood there taking everything in. Then a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You must be Evelyn Carter." She turned to find an older man approaching from across the street. His gray hair peeked from beneath a wool cap. Deep smile lines framed his face. Nothing about him suggested authority until people began greeting him respectfully as he passed. "I am Arthur Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Silver Ridge." Evelyn shook it. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Arthur studied her for a moment. His eyes were observant. Sharp, yet kind. Everyone deserves a chance. The simple response caught her off guard. No judgment. No questions about her past. No curiosity about why she arrived alone while expecting a child. Just acceptance. Arthur led her through town. He pointed out the school, the medical clinic, the community center. Residents waved as they passed. Several introduced themselves. One woman even handed Evelyn a loaf of fresh bread simply because she was new. By evening, she found herself sitting in a small rental cottage near the edge of town. A fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace. Outside, snowflakes drifted beneath the glow of streetlights. The place was modest. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a porch barely large enough for 2 chairs. Yet it felt more peaceful than anywhere she had been in months. Evelyn sat beside the window with both hands resting on her stomach. The baby shifted gently. A small movement, barely noticeable. Her eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness this time. Relief. For the first time since everything changed, she could breathe without feeling trapped. Down the street, she noticed Arthur walking home through the falling snow. Before disappearing around a corner, he glanced back toward her cottage. His thoughtful expression lingered for only a second. Then he continued on his way. Evelyn never saw the faint smile that touched his face. She never heard the words he quietly spoke to himself. "You have no idea who you are yet, young lady." Spring arrived slowly in Silver Ridge. Snow retreated from the valleys inch by inch. Streams that had slept beneath ice all winter began singing again through the forests. By then, Evelyn's life looked completely different from the one she had left behind. The townspeople knew her name. Neighbors stopped by with homemade meals. Children waved when she passed through the square. Nobody treated her like a burden. Nobody looked at her with pity. The change still surprised her sometimes. Late one evening in early April, Evelyn sat on the porch of her cottage watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. A sudden tightness spread through her stomach. She froze. Another followed several minutes later. Then another. The realization arrived quietly. It was time. Hours later, warm lights glowed inside the Silver Ridge Clinic while rain tapped gently against the roof. Nurses moved calmly through the hallways. The scent of clean linens filled the air. Evelyn gripped the edge of the hospital bed, focusing on each breath. Fear tried to creep into her thoughts, but she pushed it away. Arthur Hay sat outside the room reading an old newspaper he had not turned a page of in nearly an hour. Every time someone walked through the hallway, he looked up immediately. Near midnight, the sound finally came. A newborn cry. Small, strong, beautiful. Arthur closed his eyes for a moment and smiled. Inside the room, Evelyn stared down at the tiny bundle resting in her arms. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. The baby had a full head of dark hair. His tiny fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength. The world seemed to stop. Every worry, every heartbreak, every lonely mile she had traveled suddenly felt distant. None of it disappeared, yet none of it controlled her anymore. "Hello, Noah," she whispered. The baby blinked up at her as if recognizing her voice. A laugh escaped through her tears. "You have no idea how loved you already are." The months that followed tested her in ways she never expected. Sleep became a luxury. Money remained tight. Some mornings she woke exhausted before the sun even rose. Noah cried at unpredictable hours. Laundry seemed endless. Bills arrived with perfect consistency. More than once she sat at her kitchen table wondering how she would manage everything alone. Yet every challenge came with unexpected moments of joy. Noah's first smile arrived on a bright summer morning. His first laugh happened while a butterfly landed on the porch railing. Tiny victories became treasures. The harder life became, the more determined Evelyn grew. Arthur visited often. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he simply held Noah while Evelyn rested. Over time, he began inviting her to community meetings. At first, she sat quietly in the back, listening, observing, learning. She noticed details other people missed. She offered practical solutions. She understood people. More importantly, people trusted her. One evening after a town council meeting, Arthur remained seated long after everyone else left. He watched Evelyn gather her notes while Noah slept peacefully in a stroller beside her. "You know," Arthur said thoughtfully, "most people spend their lives waiting for someone else to lead." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That sounds exhausting." Arthur chuckled. Then his expression grew serious. "The interesting ones never realize they are already doing it." Evelyn looked at him, confused. Arthur only smiled and stood to leave. She dismissed the conversation quickly. What she did not realize was that many others in Silver Ridge had already begun noticing the same thing. Years passed more quickly than Evelyn expected. Seasons rolled across Silver Ridge in an endless rhythm of snow, spring rain, summer sunlight, and autumn leaves. Noah grew with each passing year. His laughter became a familiar sound throughout town. His curiosity seemed limitless. By the time he turned 6, he knew every trail near the valley, every shop owner on Main Street, and somehow convinced half the town to keep extra cookies behind their counters. Watching him run through the square with his friends often felt unreal to Evelyn. There had been a time when she feared she would have to face everything alone. Now she could barely walk 50 feet without someone greeting her by name. One crisp September morning, Evelyn arrived at the council hall carrying a stack of reports under one arm while balancing a cup of coffee in the other. The building buzzed with activity. Harvest season was approaching, which meant budgets, logistics, supply planning, and endless meetings. Most people dreaded it. Evelyn secretly enjoyed it. Problems made sense to her. Numbers told stories. People did too. She stepped into the conference room and immediately noticed tension hanging over the table. Several council members argued quietly over transportation routes. 2 local business owners sat with folded arms. Nobody looked happy. Arthur sat near the head of the table rubbing his temples. The moment he saw Evelyn, relief crossed his face. "Perfect timing," he said. "Perhaps you can help before I retire right here." A few chuckles broke the tension. Evelyn slid into an empty chair and listened. Really listened. That had always been her advantage. While others rushed toward solutions, she paid attention to what people were actually saying. 40 minutes later, the disagreement was settled. Not because she forced anyone to agree. She simply found the common ground everyone else missed. As the meeting ended, one of the business owners shook his head in amazement. "How do you keep doing that?" Evelyn smiled. "Doing what?" "Getting stubborn people to work together." Her smile widened slightly. "I grew up around stubborn people." Laughter filled the room. Yet after everyone left, Arthur remained seated. His thoughtful expression returned. The same look he often wore whenever he watched her interact with others. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "most leaders think leadership means having the loudest voice." Evelyn gathered her papers. "I assume you are about to tell me that it does not." "Not even close." Arthur gestured toward the empty room. "People follow those who make them feel heard." His eyes softened. "That is rare." The compliment made her uncomfortable. She never saw herself the way others did. In her mind, she was still the woman who arrived carrying 2 suitcases and too many fears. Yet Silver Ridge saw something different. Over the following months, invitations multiplied. Regional councils requested her input. Trade partners asked for her recommendations. Community leaders sought her advice. One responsibility led to another, then another. Before long, she became one of Arthur's most trusted advisors. Late one evening, after another successful regional meeting, Evelyn stood outside the council hall, watching sunset spread across the mountains. Gold light painted the valley below. Wind rustled through nearby pine trees. Behind her, voices drifted from the building as townspeople discussed plans for the future. Their future. For reasons she could not explain, a strange feeling settled over her. The sensation that life was quietly moving her towards something much bigger than she realized. Far across the valley, church bells echoed through the evening air. Evelyn smiled faintly and started walking home. She had no idea that Silver Ridge was about to face a challenge that would change everything. The call came just after sunrise. Evelyn was pouring orange juice for Noah when her phone rang. She almost ignored it. Most people who called that early either had a problem or wanted help solving one. Usually both. The moment she saw the name on the screen, however, her smile disappeared. Arthur Hayes. He never called before 8 in the morning. Arthur, she answered immediately. A long silence greeted her. Then came a voice she barely recognized. Tired. Fragile. Could you come to the council hall? He asked quietly. As soon as possible. 20 minutes later, Evelyn stood outside his office. Rain streaked down the windows. Gray clouds covered the valley. Something felt wrong. She could sense it before she even opened the door. Arthur sat behind his desk staring at a stack of papers. The room seemed smaller somehow. Older. For the first time since she had known him, he looked every bit of his age. You scared me, Evelyn admitted as she stepped inside. Arthur smiled faintly. Sorry about that. Yet the smile faded quickly. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit down. Her stomach tightened. She obeyed. For several seconds, he simply looked out the window, gathering his thoughts. Finally he spoke. I have spent 30 years helping lead this territory. His voice remained calm, but there was a heaviness beneath it. Long enough to know when it is time for someone else to carry the responsibility. Evelyn blinked. Arthur, he raised a hand gently. Let me finish. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The sound filled the silence between them. The council already knows. He nodded toward the papers on his desk. My retirement becomes official next month. Evelyn stared at him. Retirement. The word felt impossible. Arthur had always been there. Steady. Reliable. Like the mountains surrounding Silver Ridge. The idea of the town without him felt strange. Unnatural. You deserve it, she said eventually. You have done more than enough. Arthur chuckled softly. That is exactly what everyone keeps saying. His eyes shifted toward her. Unfortunately, nobody agrees on what happens next. Now she understood. Leadership transitions rarely happen smoothly. Strong personalities. Different visions. Competing priorities. Every community faced the same challenge. The council will figure it out, she said. Arthur smiled again. This time the expression carried something almost mischievous. That is where things become interesting. He slid a folder across the desk. Evelyn frowned. What is this? Open it. She did. The moment she saw the first page, her breath caught. It was a formal nomination document. Her name appeared at the top. Evelyn Carter, candidate for territorial leader of Silver Ridge. She stared at the page, then at Arthur, then back at the page. This is a mistake. No, Arthur's voice remained steady. It is not. Her pulse quickened. I have never even wanted this position. Exactly. Arthur leaned forward slightly. The people who chase power usually make me nervous. Evelyn laughed once in disbelief. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious. The room fell silent. Outside, rain continued falling across the valley. Inside, her entire future seemed to shift beneath her feet. She looked down at the nomination again. Her hands felt strangely cold. Arthur watched her carefully. Then he asked the question that would change everything. Evelyn, have you ever considered that Silver Ridge already sees you as its leader? The nomination spread through Silver Ridge faster than Evelyn imagined possible. By the end of the week, nearly everyone had heard about it. Some stopped her on the sidewalk to offer encouragement. Others simply smiled when she walked past. A few council members visited her office personally. Each conversation left her feeling more overwhelmed than the last. Leadership had never been part of her plan. Survival had been the plan. Raising Noah had been the plan. Building a quiet life had been the plan. Somehow, somewhere along the way, the path changed without asking permission. One evening, she sat alone on her porch after Noah had fallen asleep. The valley stretched quietly beneath a sky filled with stars. Crickets sang from the nearby grass. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the darkness. Evelyn wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stared toward the mountains. Arthur's question still echoed inside her mind. Have you ever considered that Silver Ridge already sees you as its leader? She hated how difficult it was to answer. The next several weeks became a blur of meetings, interviews, community forums, and council discussions. Other candidates entered the process. Most possessed impressive resumes. Several had spent decades involved in regional politics. One former councilman openly questioned whether someone with Evelyn's background belonged in consideration at all. She expected the criticism. What surprised her was how little it affected her. Years earlier, those comments would have shattered her confidence. Now they felt distant, small. She no longer needed everyone to believe in her. She only needed to remain honest about who she was. During one public forum, a resident stood and asked a difficult question. Why should we trust you with the future of Silver Ridge? The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. Evelyn took a slow breath. Because I love this place enough to tell you the truth, she answered. I do not have all the answers. I never will. What I do have is the willingness to listen, learn, and work beside you instead of above you. Silence lingered for several seconds. Then someone began applauding. Others followed. The sound filled the room. Not loud, not dramatic, genuine. By the time voting day arrived, autumn had returned to the valley. Golden leaves drifted from trees lining the streets. Noah insisted on walking beside her to the council hall. He wore a blue jacket that looked slightly too big for him. His hand remained firmly wrapped around hers. Are you nervous? He asked as they crossed the town square. Evelyn laughed softly. Very. Noah considered that for a moment. Good. She raised an eyebrow. Good. Arthur says people should be nervous when something matters. The answer made her smile. They arrived just before noon. Residents filled the hall. Conversations buzzed throughout the building. Excitement hung in the air. Hours later, the final results were announced. The room grew completely still. Evelyn felt her heartbeat pounding inside her chest. The council chairman unfolded a piece of paper. His voice carried clearly through the hall. By majority vote, the next territorial leader of Silver Ridge is Evelyn Carter. For one brief second, she forgot how to breathe. Then the room erupted. Applause echoed from every corner. People stood. Smiles appeared everywhere she looked. Noah launched himself into her arms before she could even process what happened. Tears filled her eyes as she held him tightly. Across the room, Arthur remained seated. He simply smiled. Proud. Certain. As if he had known this outcome long before anyone else. Yet hundreds of miles away, news of Silver Ridge's new leader had already begun traveling beyond the mountains, toward a kingdom where one man would soon read a name he never expected to see again.